every single React hook. If you're familiar with my channel, I have a video already on this. It's actually my most successful video so far on my channel. And the reason why I wanted to remake this
is because that video was made 3 years ago and I didn't even cover every single hook. And as of 2024, a lot of new hooks were introduced. Some hooks were removed and became completely deprecated. So I wanted to make a new video on this because it seemed like a lot of you guys really enjoyed my last one. My purpose of this video at one cheat sheet to put also introtech.co if you're interested in that as well. But yeah, that's basically it, as much as I am. Okay, everyone, so let's get started. Before I get into our first hook, which is going to obviously be the use state hook, the most simple hook that you can learn in React, I want to explain a little bit about how I'm going to structure this code base in case you want to just follow the examples by going to the code base in the description. How I structure this is I have this folder over here called hooks, and inside of it we'll have the example I'm using in the video for each of the individual hooks, also accompanied by any files that I use for the examples. So if you're interested in just checking out the use ID example, you can click on it and go in there. But in our case, we're going to start with the use state hook. And the way this file is structured is obviously just empty in the beginning, but we'll be including them in our app component as we go through the video, just to show them on our right over here. So let's get started with the use state hook. So if you are a complete beginner in React, I might help you. I will explain to you guys the DOM JavaScript. States are the fundamental building blocks of a React application. I believe is used component over here. I'm going to put a div, which is going to wrap a p tag, so a paragraph tag, which is going to display some number, which is going to be the count. Then we want to have a button over here, which is going to interact with that number by increasing its value. So we'll say increase counter. Now we currently have no way to store a variable, which I'll create is increase, put some logic to increase the count. Perfect. By what increases the, see that the because if directly to DOM needs to be updated and re-rendered automatically depending how the state of our application is. So this is the idea of a state. A state in its most simplest form is just a variable that you can create and change its value. And when its value is changed, it will automatically trigger a re-render of your page to demonstrate the new value. So how do we create one? Well, the way you do it is like this. You say const and then set an open and closing square brackets. Then you set it equal to the use state hook. It should automatically import it from React. Then we open and close parentheses, and you'll see that most hooks will look a similar way. Now, what do you put over here? Well, you put the initial value of what your state what you want your state to be. So in this case, count starts at 0, so we can put 0 over here. But this, you could also pass an empty string if your state represents a string, or even an object if that's the case as well. So we'll keep it as 0. And what do we put inside of here? Well, with the way that the use state hook is defined, and you can look at it if you want to, this should return back inside of here two things. The first is the value of your state, which is being called, you can call it whatever you want, let's call it count. And then it is a function that you can use to alter the state. So we're going to call this set count. Usually it has this notation with set in front and then usually the name of the state. But why do we need a function to change it? Because although this count variable is actually working similar to how it was before when we were using let, you'll see that altering the value of it by just increasing it like this doesn't work, because what you have to do is use this set count function and mutate the value inside of it. So we'll replace this over here and we'll open and close parentheses to call this set count function. Now, what do I mean by mutating this value? Well, this function inside of here, it allows you to have a callback function inside of it. So a function that gives you access to the previous value of the state. So if count is 0 initially, the first time we call this prev value over here will be equal to 0. Now if we increase it by 1, the next time prev will be equal to 1. So what we return from this function is just the new value of our state with this alteration. So when we call increase count, all we want to do is get the previous value and increase it by 1. If we wanted to decrease it, we could subtract or multiply or do whatever we want with this. But in our case, we want to just add it. And by doing this, we'll ensure that we're altering our state in the correct way and thus making React actually trigger a re-render because it is using the value of that state inside of this component. So you see now, if I keep clicking on this, it will keep increasing. Now, one cool thing that helps you understand more about the React lifecycle is looking at our old console log, this thing over here, right? If we go over, we only call logging. So you should assume that when you click at this, we're console logging, run set count over here. So, the hook that we made. Okay, everyone. So if you're playing around with the code base, I would ensure that your page renders. So what there's, if I could use a use effect for that. Now, how is data? And in this case, we're accessing data for like some posts. So like as if you're in Facebook making some posts. But the idea is that we want to go into our website over here. And when I first render the page, I want to run a function that will fetch this data and display it in my screen. Now, keep in mind, doing this inside of a use effect is one of the methods you're going to be using a use effect for the most as a beginner. But as you grow older, using stuff like later on. Well, I'm actually lit from this API request and display to do perfect effect to a component. You put ever console log, you'll see that it will actually console log over here where it does our render able to use effect. We have to NSA the page render only state get to that its value. Run this what we want, and this is converting with that. Actually, I need to now we're launched with so we'll see and log.
Haus, mending minum Sprite dengan lemon dan jeruk nipis, nyegerin Sprite, seger bener.
Logging the JSON data, I want to set the data state to be equal to whatever list we get from the API. Perfect. Now, to display this list over here, we'll, through this data, its value, and in this case, you see, it already shows the 100. We'll literally just display the title. So I'll say item.title. Now we know it's title because we can see to explain not the lines of page, but make this state into the opposite of what it is, right? So if it's true, it will become false. If it's false, it will become true. Because I want to show you guys exactly what this use effect dependency list does. So to do that, it does twice whenever this is the first run, because I was acting to the most important hooks in React, especially when you're starting your journey and you want to learn how to build applications that can actually scale and manage your states, which is the use context hook. These elements two child called child, two parts are user that is the child. One here is pointed a net woodward table. What's more you can I'm gonna call it that so I'm gonna know if it's content whole globe. Now you wanna sincerely will here go and I'll believe here is the content is and this the whole when I put this everything application learning a bit of the additional ones where it's not the end of the world if you don't actually learn them. Especially when I'm talking about the use reducer hook. This is probably one of the most underutilized hooks that I've seen from React, and there's multiple reasons for it. It is technically a hook that should be used instead of the use state hook to manage more complex state logic, like when you have multiple related variables or actions. It does use the same pattern as something like Redux because both of them use the reducer pattern. That's where the name use reducer comes from. And some people live by saying that you need to use the use reducer hook if your app grows beyond a simple app. But as you might hear from a lot of people, it is not technically required. I believe just using states can also be a good thing as well. So the best way to explain this is by putting a situation here in the screen in which we are using a useState. So I brought back the example from the counter app that we made, and I made it a little bit more complex by adding the subtraction as well, which was broken. But you can see it's a very simple counter app where I can add and subtract values, and it will appear over here. Now I could technically add as well more things. I could add a multiply, right? I could add a multiply over here and then make the prev multiply, and you'll see that this would also work. Actually, I'll multiply times 2. I'll double. Sorry about that. Now this is using complex is, well, as you have grabbed the first pass when a do function. Well, when you want to change this state and any part of it, I think this will break. Yeah, you'll see it breaks. So we want to put this case, let's type name is over here. You can do whatever, switch case with of the use f hook. Almost like I'm trying to solve, but in React. If you see the UI, meaning you don't want it to start changing and understanding how your app is working without actually causing issues like re-rendering. The best analogy I've heard specific functionality, like in this case, we're just exposing those like data fetching to
Fresti Markisa yang dicari-cari nih. Fresti, paduannya nikmat.
To basically check to see the of how we're dealing with do like use the fur hook that is or the start that will thing that will now we're to solve issues that you're using technical aspects with Pokemon data from the API. It will update the state and notify all subscribers of this store when then component that needs to access this data